The gloves never came off, not in summer heat, not at the saloon, not even when Caleb Rourke shook the preacher's hand on his wedding day. Fort Worth whispered he was hiding burns, or prison marks, or something worse. His new bride didn't know the truth yet. Beneath those gloves, beneath the high-collared coat he wore in 100-degree shade, silver symbols crawled across his skin like living lightning, and when his control slipped, men died. She'd married him anyway, sight unseen, because desperation doesn't ask questions. But desperation also doesn't prepare you for the moment your husband's eyes start to glow. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Caleb and his bride's story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll find out whether love can survive a man marked by elemental force. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The stage depot in Fort Worth smelled like axle grease and broken promises. Clara Ashford stood beside her trunk, the only thing she owned that hadn't been pawned or left behind in Philadelphia, and read the notice one more time, though she'd memorized every word 3 states ago. Seeking wife. North Ranch, 12 miles northwest. Work required. Protection guaranteed. No questions asked. Reply care of land office, she'd replied. 27 years old, no family, no prospects, no illusions. The man who'd written back signed himself C. Rourke and asked only 2 things. Could she cook? And could she keep her word? She'd answered yes to both, which was one answer more honest than the other. Now she was here, and the land office clerk was staring at her like she had asked directions to her own funeral. North Ranch, he said slowly. You sure about that, miss? Mrs. Rourke, Clara corrected. As of tomorrow, if the arrangement stands. The clerk's mustache twitched. He was a narrow man with ink-stained fingers and the cautious eyes of someone who'd learned not to get involved. Arrangement's one word for it. Is there a problem with the property? Property's fine. 300 acres, good water, decent grazing. He hesitated. It's Rourke you ought to know about. Clara had heard versions of this conversation in the boarding house at the depot from the stage driver who'd tried to talk her into staying in town an extra week to think things through. She was tired of it. I know he keeps to himself. That's a polite way to put it. Then put it another way. The clerk glanced toward the open door where afternoon sun bleached the street white. His voice dropped. Caleb Rourke came here 5 years ago with gold coin and no past. Bought North Ranch outright, cash money, and hasn't spent a night in town since. Doesn't drink, doesn't gamble, doesn't talk unless he's buying supplies, and he doesn't... The man paused, choosing his words. He doesn't dress like a man who's got nothing to hide. Meaning? Meaning it's August, Mrs. Ashford, and I've never seen him without gloves. Long sleeves, high collar, coat buttoned to the throat. Every time. Every season. The clerk leaned forward. People talk. Clara picked up her reticule. People always talk. They say he's got marks, prison marks maybe, or burns from something he doesn't want explained. The clerk's voice went quieter still. Some say worse. What's worse than burns? The man didn't answer. He just looked at her with something close to pity, which Clara found more insulting than the gossip. She kept her voice level. Is there a law against marrying him? No, ma'am. Then I'll need directions to North Ranch. The clerk sighed and drew a map on the back of a feed bill. 12 miles northwest past Willow Creek. Watch for the gate with the iron star. He pushed it across the desk like he was washing his hands of her. Clara took it. Thank you. Good luck, he said, and didn't mean it kindly. She hired a wagon from the livery and drove herself. The road northwest was rutted clay and prairie grass, the sky a hard blue vault that made the land feel even emptier. She passed 2 homesteads, both with washing on the line and children in the yard, both far enough from the road that no one waved. Loneliness was something Clara understood. She'd been lonely in Philadelphia too, in the narrow boarding house room, in the dress shop where she'd worked 16 hours a day until her eyes blurred, in the parlor where her aunt made it clear she was a burden and always would be. At least here the loneliness had space around it. At least here she'd chosen it. The iron star gate appeared just before sunset, 2 posts and a crossbar with a 5-pointed star welded from black iron. No name, no brand, just the star. Clara climbed down, opened the gate, drove through, closed it behind her. A mile farther, the road curved through a stand of cottonwoods, and she saw the ranch. It wasn't much. A low house built from stone and timber, a barn that had seen better years, a corral with 3 horses watching her approach. Neat, though. The fence lines were straight, the wood stacked square, the yard swept clean of debris. It looked like a place where a careful man lived. Clara pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch. No one came out. She waited, hands folded in her lap, while the horses blew and stamped and the sun slid lower. She was about to climb down when the door opened. Caleb Rourke stepped into the light. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, and lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate little. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so rigidly controlled. And he was dressed exactly as the clerk described. Black gloves, black coat buttoned high despite the heat, collar tight against his throat. He looked like a preacher or an undertaker or something else entirely. He stopped at the edge of the porch. His eyes moved over her, the wagon, the trunk, then back to her face. Clara Ashford. His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, something clipped and foreign beneath the flatness of the plains. Not German, not Irish. Something older. Yes. She didn't move. Mr. Rourke, you came. I said I would. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. He came down the steps, and Clara noticed the way he moved, precise, contained, like a man aware of every inch of space his body occupied. He stopped 3 feet from the wagon. Long drive, he said. 12 miles. You could have sent word. I would have come to town. I didn't need an escort. This time he did almost smile. It didn't reach his eyes. No, I don't imagine you did. He looked at the trunk. I'll bring that inside. You'll want to see the house. And discuss terms, Clara said. Caleb's gaze sharpened. I wrote the terms. You wrote your terms. I have some of my own. For a moment he just watched her, and Clara had the unsettling sense that he saw more than she intended to show. Then he nodded once. Fair enough. Come inside. The house was smaller than it looked from outside. 1 main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, a door to what she assumed was a bedroom. Sparse furniture, clean floor, windows that still had glass. No photographs, no books, no personal things except a rifle over the mantel and a pair of saddlebags hanging from a peg. Caleb set her trunk by the door and turned to face her, hands at his sides. Even inside, he didn't remove the gloves. You wrote you needed a wife, Clara said. I did. For work and keeping house. Yes. In exchange for protection and a roof. And meals. And your name on the deed if something happens to me. He paused. Those were my terms. Clara unbuttoned her travel coat. The room was stifling. Here are mine. I'll work. Cooking, mending, garden, if you've got one. I'll keep the house and I won't pry into your business. But I'm not a servant and I'm not property. Agreed. I sleep in the bedroom, alone, unless I say otherwise. Caleb's expression didn't change. Agreed. And if this arrangement doesn't work, if either of us wants out, we part without trouble. No law, no violence. Agreed. He tilted his head slightly. Anything else? Clara met his eyes. They were dark brown, almost black, and colder than she'd expected. Not cruel, just distant, like he'd taught himself not to feel too much. Why do you wear gloves in August? She asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Caleb's jaw tightened, and for a second Clara thought he might tell her to leave. Then he said very quietly, That falls under not prying into my business. It falls under me wondering if I'm safe here. You're safe. From what? His eyes held hers. From me. The silence stretched long enough that Clara could hear the wind outside, the creak of the house settling. She didn't look away. Neither did he. Finally, Caleb stepped back. We marry tomorrow. Courthouse in Fort Worth, 9 o'clock. After that, you're legally protected. My name, my land, everything I have. If you decide tonight you don't want that, I'll drive you back to town in the morning and pay your stage fare east. I don't want to go east. Then we have an agreement. Clara nodded slowly. We do. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused. I sleep in the barn. You'll have the house to yourself tonight. There's stew on the stove and bread in the box. Help yourself. Where will you be? Outside. It's going to be cold tonight. I'll manage. He opened the door and the evening light spilled in, turning his dark coat amber at the edges. Lock the door, Mrs. Ashford. I'll come for you at dawn. Then he was gone, and Clara was alone in the house of a man she'd agreed to marry in less than 12 hours. She didn't sleep much. The bed was narrow but clean, the quilts heavy and smelling faintly of sage. She lay awake listening to the wind and thinking about the way Caleb had looked at her when she'd asked about the gloves. Not angry, exactly. Guarded, like she'd touched something he kept locked away. People talk, the clerk had said. Prison marks. Burns. Worse. Clara had seen men with scars before. Philadelphia wasn't gentle. She'd stitched up her cousin after a factory accident, held compresses on her aunt's head after she fell down the stairs drunk. She wasn't squeamish. But something about Caleb Rourke's careful distance, the way he held himself like a loaded gun, made her wonder what kind of past required gloves in summer heat. At dawn, she rose, washed, and dressed in the only good dress she owned, gray wool, high-necked, respectable. When she came into the main room, Caleb was already waiting by the door, dressed exactly as he'd been the night before. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes." They drove to Fort Worth in silence. Caleb handled the wagon with easy competence, his gloved hands steady on the reins. Clara watched the land roll past and tried not to think about the fact that in an hour she'd be married to a stranger. The courthouse was a squat brick building on Main Street. The justice of the peace was a tired man with spectacles who asked no questions and seemed unsurprised when Caleb produced a ring from his coat pocket, plain silver, worn smooth, too large for Clara's finger. He slipped it on anyway. "Do you take this woman?" the justice intoned. "I do," Caleb said. "Do you take this man?" Clara looked at Caleb's face, still distant, still controlled, and thought about the empty house waiting back at North Ranch, the long road behind her, the choices that had led here. "I do," she said. The justice pronounced them married. Caleb didn't kiss her. He shook her hand instead, his gloved fingers firm and impersonal, and Clara felt the strangeness of it settle over her like a cloak. She was Mrs. Rourke now, legally bound to a man who wouldn't touch her skin to skin. They signed the papers. Caleb paid the fee. On the way out, Clara saw the land office clerk across the street, watching them with that same pitying expression. She lifted her chin and didn't look back. The first week at North Ranch passed in careful routine. Clara cooked. Caleb ate in silence and thanked her quietly. She mended. He brought her a sewing kit and a pile of shirts with frayed cuffs. She swept, washed, organized the pantry. He worked the land from dawn until dark, mending fence, tending horses, hauling water. They were polite, formal, like business partners. At night, Caleb disappeared, sometimes to the barn, sometimes farther out onto the property. Clara would see him from the window, a dark shape against the stars, standing so still he could have been carved from stone. She didn't ask. That was the agreement. But she noticed things. The way he never removed his coat, even when he came in from hours of hard labor and his face was flushed with heat. The way he kept distance between them, 3 feet minimum, always. The way his hands, even gloved, never touched anything carelessly. Everything deliberate. Everything controlled. And she noticed the way people in town looked at him when they drove in for supplies. The second Saturday, Clara needed thread and sugar. Caleb took her to the mercantile and waited outside, leaning against the post like he was standing guard. Inside, the shopkeeper's wife, a plump woman named Mrs. Harrow, leaned across the counter with eager, prying eyes. "So you went through with it," she said. Clara counted coins onto the counter. "Yes." "Brave girl, or foolish?" Mrs. Harrow wrapped the thread in brown paper. "He treating you all right?" "He's been perfectly civil." "Civil." The woman laughed, but it wasn't kind. "That's one word for it. Cold's another. My husband says Caleb Rourke's got ice water in his veins." Clara picked up her parcels. "Your husband doesn't know him." "Nobody knows him, dear. That's the problem. Mrs. Harrow leaned closer, voice dropping. But Dr. Brennan saw him once, 3 years ago when Rourke took a bad fall from a horse and couldn't ride to avoid it. Brennan had to cut the shirt off to check for broken ribs. Clara's hands stilled. And? Mrs. Harrow's eyes gleamed. He said there were marks all across Rourke's back and arms. Not scars, not tattoos, marks. Like someone had drawn symbols on him in silver ink, except they weren't ink. They were under the skin, Brennan said, glowing faint, like they were alive. The shop felt suddenly airless. Clara forced her voice steady. That sounds like a story. Brennan's not a liar. He told the sheriff, and the sheriff told him to keep his mouth shut and his suspicions to himself. Mrs. Harrow straightened, satisfied. But people talk, and what they say is, your husband's got something unnatural about him, something he's hiding for a reason. Clara left without answering. Outside, Caleb was exactly where she'd left him. He took the parcels without a word and loaded them into the wagon. As they drove out of town, Clara watched his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the careful blankness of his expression. What did she say? Caleb asked quietly. Clara startled. Who? Mrs. Harrow. I saw you talking. For a moment, Clara considered lying. Then she remembered the terms. No questions, but no lies either. She said Dr. Brennan saw marks on your skin. Silver marks. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, just slightly, but Clara saw it. What else? That they glowed. That they were under your skin. He didn't respond. They rode another mile in silence. Finally, Clara said, Is it true? Caleb stared straight ahead at the road. Would it matter? I don't know yet. He almost smiled at that. Bitter. Brief. Honest answer. It's the only kind I've got. Another long silence. Then Caleb said, Yes, it's true. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs, but she kept her voice even. What are they? Something I didn't ask for. He glanced at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, his expression was unguarded, raw and tired, and something close to desperate. I can't explain it, Clara. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I swear to you, I'm not dangerous, not to you. Just to yourself? His mouth thinned. That's my concern. We're married. That makes it mine, too. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Then he turned back to the road. You didn't sign up for this. I signed up for no questions asked, Clara said, so I won't ask. But if you need help, I don't. Everyone needs help sometimes. Not me. His voice was flat, final. I handle my own trouble. Clara subsided. She understood that tone. It was the same one she'd used in Philadelphia when her aunt offered charity with one hand and judgment with the other. Pride and shame wrapped so tight they couldn't be separated. They didn't speak again until they reached North Ranch. The trouble started small. A week after the conversation in the wagon, Clara woke in the middle of the night to the sound of breaking glass. She grabbed the shawl from the bedpost and hurried into the main room. The window near the fireplace had shattered inward, and a rock the size of a fist lay in the center of the floor, wrapped in paper. Clara's hands shook as she unfolded it. 3 words in rough pencil. Leave while you can. The door slammed open. Caleb stood in the threshold, hair wild, coat unbuttoned for the first time since she'd arrived. Beneath it, she glimpsed a shirt, and beneath that, faint silver lines running up the side of his throat. His eyes found the rock, the note, her face. Are you hurt? No, just startled. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the note from her hand. His jaw worked as he read it. When he looked up, his eyes were burning, not with anger, but something colder, controlled fury. This is my fault, he said quietly. It's the fault of whoever threw it. Same thing. He crumpled the note in his fist. I'll ride into town tomorrow. Find out who... And do what? Clara asked. Start a fight? Prove them right about whatever they think you are? Caleb stared at her. They threatened you. They threatened us. There's a difference. She pulled the shawl tighter. I'm not leaving, Caleb. if that's what you're worried about. You should. Why? Because someone's ignorant and cruel? Clara shook her head. I've dealt with worse. Not like this. You don't know what I've dealt with. That stopped him. He looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing past the gray dress and the quiet voice to something underneath. No, he said slowly. I don't. Clara bent and picked up the rock. It was river stone, smooth and cold. We'll board up the window tonight and replace the glass tomorrow, and we'll keep going. Clara, that's my answer, Caleb. Unless you want to break our agreement and tell me to leave. His expression shuddered. No. Then we keep going. He nodded once, stiffly, and went to fetch boards. They worked side by side in silence, hammering planks across the broken window. Clara was acutely aware of him beside her, the heat coming off his skin despite the cool night, the way his hands moved with that same careful precision, even when he was angry, the faint luminescence she could see now at the edge of his collar when he turned a certain way. Silver marks. Glowing. What are you? She wanted to ask. But she'd promised no questions, and Clara Ashford kept her word. When they finished, Caleb stepped back. I'll stay inside tonight, on the floor. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was rough. If someone comes back, I need to be here. Clara looked at him, this strange, distant man who'd given her his name and his protection and nothing else, and felt something shift in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. All right, she said. There are extra blankets in the chest. No one came back that night, but the message had been delivered. In town, the whispers grew louder. Clara heard them in the mercantile, at the post office, outside the church she didn't attend. Caleb Rourke's new wife. Poor thing. Doesn't know what she's gotten into. Heard he was a killer once. Heard he's got marks like the devil's own writing. And then, one afternoon at the feed store, Clara overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two men by the grain sacks, voices low, but not low enough. Sheriff's asking questions about Rourke again. What kind of questions? The kind that mention a bounty and a name. The first man paused. The marked hunter. Clara froze. The second man whistled low. That's just a story. Maybe, but the description fits. Foreign accent, always covered up, keeps to himself. And they say the marked hunter had silver lines on his skin, some kind of brand from the people he tracked. The man's voice dropped further. They say he could find anyone, anywhere, and that he never brought them back alive. Clara left without buying anything. That night, she confronted Caleb. He was outside, checking the horses, when she walked into the barn. He looked up, startled. She never came out here after dark. Is it true? Clara asked. Caleb straightened slowly. Is what true? Were you the marked hunter? The silence that followed was answer enough. Caleb's face went very still, and Clara saw something break behind his eyes, some last defense crumbling. Yes, he said. Clara's hands clenched in her skirts. Did you kill people? Yes. How many? I stopped counting. His voice was flat, empty. Does that change things? Clara's heart hammered. I don't know. Tell me the rest. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he shrugged off his coat. Clara's breath caught. Even in the dim lantern light, she could see them, silver symbols running up his arms, across his collarbones, disappearing beneath the shirt. Not tattoos, they seemed to move slightly, like water under glass, pulsing faint with their own light. These aren't decorative, Caleb said quietly. They're a curse or a gift. Depends on who you ask. He rolled up one sleeve, revealing more of the intricate patterns. I was marked 5 years ago. Against my will, it gives me abilities. I can sense things, track things, and when I lose control, I can channel force I don't understand. What kind of force? Elemental, stormborn. He met her eyes. I used it to hunt people. Criminals, mostly. Men who'd done terrible things. I was good at it, too good. And then I took a job that went wrong, and he stopped, swallowed hard. What happened? Clara whispered. A village. 23 people. Dead in a single night. His voice cracked. I was trying to stop the men I'd been hired to find, but I lost control. The power surged, and I didn't. He turned away. I killed them all, Clara. Every last one. The barn was silent except for the horses shifting in their stalls. Clara felt like the ground had opened beneath her feet. So you came here, she said. I came here to disappear, to make sure it never happened again. He looked back at her, and his eyes were haunted. That's why the gloves, the distance, the rules. I can't afford to feel too much, Clara. I can't afford to let anyone close, because if I lose control again, you won't. He laughed bitterly. You don't know that. Neither do you. Clara took a step closer. You've been here 5 years, Caleb. Alone. Controlled. If you were going to lose it, you would have by now. Or I've just been lucky. I don't believe in luck. I believe in choices. Another step. You chose to leave, to isolate yourself, to protect people from what you are. That's not a monster, Caleb. That's a man trying to do right. It's not enough. Maybe not, but it's something. Clara stopped 3 feet away, their usual distance. I'm not leaving. Caleb stared at her. You should. I know, but I'm not. She met his eyes. We made an agreement. I keep my word. For a long moment, he just looked at her, something raw and desperate and almost hopeful flickering across his face. Then he nodded once and turned away, rolling down his sleeve. Storm's coming, he said quietly. Big one. You should get inside. Clara glanced at the barn doors. The sky beyond was clear and full of stars. I don't see. I can feel it. Caleb's voice was tight. Go inside, Clara. Lock the door. Don't come out until morning. What about you? I'll be fine. Caleb, please. He looked at her, and Clara saw real fear in his eyes. Just trust me, this once. Clara hesitated, then she nodded and left. As behind her, she heard Caleb let out a shaking breath, and in the distance, thunder rumbled where no clouds had been a moment before. The storm was coming, and Clara had a feeling everything was about to change. The storm hit 3 hours before dawn. Clara woke to wind shrieking against the boarded window and rain hammering the roof like fists. She sat up in the darkness, heart pounding, and remembered Caleb's warning. He'd felt it coming when the sky was still clear. How was that possible unless lightning cracked so close the walls shuddered, and in the flash of white light Clara saw her shadow leap across the floor. She threw off the quilts and grabbed her shawl, feet bare on the cold wood. The main room was dark except for the dying embers in the fireplace, and when she looked out the one unbroken window, she could see nothing but sheets of rain and the wild thrashing of cottonwood branches. Where was Caleb? She pulled on her boots, not bothering to lace them, and pushed open the door. The wind nearly tore it from her hands. Rain lashed her face, soaking through her nightgown and shawl in seconds. She stumbled off the porch, squinting against the downpour. Caleb! Her voice was swallowed by thunder. She pushed forward, one hand shielding her eyes, trying to see past the curtain of rain. The barn was a black shape against the fractured sky. Lightning flashed again, and Clara saw the door hanging open, swinging on its hinges. She ran. Inside the barn it was chaos, horses screaming, hooves pounding against stall doors, the whole structure groaning under the force of the wind. Clara fumbled for the lantern that hung by the entrance, but her hands were shaking too hard to light it. Another flash of lightning illuminated the interior, and Clara's breath stopped. Caleb was on his knees in the center of the barn floor. His coat lay discarded, his shirt soaked transparent and clinging to his frame. And beneath the fabric, silver symbols blazed like living lightning, intricate patterns covering his back, his arms, his shoulders, pulsing in rhythm with the storm outside. They weren't just glowing. They were moving, writhing under his skin like serpents made of light. Caleb! Clara ran to him, dropping to her knees. What's happening? He didn't seem to hear her. His head was bowed, hands pressed flat against the dirt floor, and his whole body was rigid with agony. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold, and when lightning struck again, Clara saw his eyes were squeezed shut, jaw clenched so tight she thought his teeth might crack. Caleb, look at me. Get back. His voice was barely human, raw and guttural, scraped from somewhere deep. Clara, get away from me. No, I can't, he gasped, back arching. The silver marks flared brighter, and Clara felt the air around them crackle with static. Her hair lifted, standing on end. I can't control it. The storm. It's too strong. Thunder shook the earth. One of the horses kicked through its stall door, eyes rolling white with terror. Clara grabbed Caleb's shoulder without thinking, and the moment her hand made contact, the marks beneath his shirt surged hot against her palm. Caleb jerked away like she'd burned him. Don't touch me. Let me help. You can't. He looked at her then, and Clara's heart stuttered. His eyes were wrong, the irises edged with silver light, pupils blown wide and wild. The last time this happened, I killed 23 people, Clara. 23. I won't... His words dissolved into a choked sound as another wave of pain hit. I won't let that happen again. Lightning struck so close, Clara smelled ozone. The barn door blew completely off its hinges, and rain poured in, turning the floor to mud. Caleb was shaking now, hands digging into the earth, and the silver marks were so bright Clara could barely look at them directly. Tell me what to do, she said. Leave, run, get as far from me as... He broke off with a strangled gasp. Please, Clara, I'm begging you. Clara Liu looked at him, this man who'd married her with careful distance, who slept outside in the cold rather than risk proximity, who'd hidden for 5 years to keep people safe from what he carried, and made a choice. She wrapped both arms around him from behind. Caleb went rigid. What are you... You said you lose control when emotions spike, Clara said against his ear, raising her voice over the storm. So we're going to stay calm, together. You don't understand? Then explain it to me. For a heartbeat, he was silent except for his ragged breathing. Then, haltingly, words started to come. The marks. They connect me to elemental forces. Storm, earth, wind. When weather turns violent, it pulls at the power. Tries to make me channel it, and if I resist wrong, if I panic, it surges and I can't stop it. So don't resist, Clara said. Let it flow. If I do that, you won't hurt me. She didn't know if that was true, but she said it with absolute conviction. You've spent 5 years learning control, Caleb. You know how to do this. Not in a storm like this. Not when... He shuddered, and Clara felt the heat radiating through his shirt. It hurts, Clara. Every nerve feels like it's on fire. I know. I'm here. She tightened her grip, pressing her cheek against his back. Through the wet fabric, she could feel the marks pulsing, hot and alive. Breathe with me. In. Out. Slow. I can't. Yes, you can. Clara drew a deep breath, exaggerating the rise and fall of her chest against his spine. In. Out. Match me. For a terrible moment, she thought he wouldn't, couldn't. Then she felt his breathing hitch, stutter, and slowly begin to sync with hers. In, out, in, out. The silver marks still blazed, but their frantic pulsing started to settle into a steadier rhythm. That's it, Clara murmured. You're doing it. It's still, there's too much. Then let some out, small amounts, controlled. I don't know how. Yes, you do. You tracked people for years. You used this power without killing them every time, didn't you? Caleb's hands trembled against the earth. That was different. How? I was alone, focused, not... He broke off as another surge hit. Clara felt his muscles lock, felt the terrible heat spike under her hands. Not trying to protect someone at the same time. You don't have to protect me. I chose to be here. Clara, let it out, Caleb. Just a little. Into the ground. Into the air. Wherever it needs to go. She felt him hesitate. Then, slowly, deliberately, his fingers spread wider against the dirt floor. The silver marks flared bright enough that Clara had to close her eyes, and the air around them seemed to compress and then release in a rush. Thunder cracked directly overhead, but this time it felt different, not random, but responsive. Like the storm was answering something Caleb had asked. The pressure in the barn eased slightly. The horses stopped screaming. Caleb's breathing was still ragged, but no longer desperate. It's working, Clara whispered. Barely. But his voice was more human now. I can't hold this for long. You don't have to hold it. Just guide it. Clara kept her arms locked around him, anchoring him with her weight and her words. The storm wants to rage. Let it rage out there, not in here. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Clara lost track of time, focused entirely on the rise and fall of Caleb's breathing, the gradual cooling of the marks beneath his skin. The storm raged on outside, wild and violent, but inside the barn the air grew calmer, steady. Finally, as dawn began to gray the eastern sky, the rain slackened. The wind dropped. The thunder rolled away to the west like a retreating army. Caleb sagged forward, and Clara went with him, still holding on. They ended up in a heap on the muddy floor, both soaked and shaking. The silver marks had faded to a dim glow, barely visible in the growing light. For a long time neither of them moved. Then Caleb said, voice hoarse, "You're still here. I told you I would be. I could have killed you. But you didn't." Clara loosened her grip slightly, giving him room to pull away if he wanted. He didn't. "You controlled it, Caleb. We controlled it." He turned his head just enough to look at her, and Clara saw exhaustion and wonder and something else in his eyes. "I don't understand. Every other time I've tried to fight through a storm, it's gotten worse. But with you, maybe you weren't supposed to fight alone." He stared at her. Then, very slowly, he reached up and pulled off one glove. His hand was bare underneath, strong fingers, calloused palm, and silver lines running across the back like delicate jewelry. He held it up between them, watching her face. Clara looked at the marks, then at him. She reached out and took his hand in both of hers. Caleb flinched. "Clara, does it hurt?" "No, it—" He stopped, seeming surprised. "It doesn't hurt." Clara ran her thumb over the silver symbols on his knuckles. They were warm, but not burning, smooth under her touch. "They're beautiful. They're a curse. They're part of you." She met his eyes. "And I'm not afraid of them." Something in Caleb's expression cracked open. He pulled his hand back gently, but not in rejection, in disbelief. "You should be." "I'm not." Clara sat up, still holding his gaze. "I'm wet, I'm cold, and I'm covered in mud. But I'm not afraid." For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb Rourke smiled. Really smiled. Not the bitter, almost expression he'd shown before. It transformed his face, made him look younger and infinitely more human. "You're insane," he said. "Probably." Clara smiled back. "Come on, let's get inside before we both catch our deaths." They helped each other up, muddy and exhausted. Caleb retrieved his coat and gloves, pulling them back on with practiced efficiency. But Clara noticed he moved slower now, less desperate, less like a man trying to hide evidence of something shameful. The house was cold and dark, but it was standing. Clara built up the fire while Caleb checked for damage. The boarded window had held. The roof hadn't leaked. They'd survived. Clara changed into dry clothes and hung her nightgown by the fire. When she came back into the main room, Caleb was standing by the window, looking out at the gray dawn. He'd changed his shirt but kept the coat on. The gloves were still in place. "I need to tell you something," he said without turning around. Clara waited. "The marked hunter. That name you heard in town." Caleb's shoulders were tense. "It's not wrong. I was a tracker, a mercenary. People hired me to find criminals, fugitives, anyone who'd disappeared. And I was good at it because of this." He gestured vaguely at his own body. "The marks let me sense things, fear, guilt, intent. I could track someone across 100 miles of open country just by following the trail their emotions left behind." "That sounds like a gift," Clara said carefully. "It was a weapon." His voice hardened. "I used it for 5 years. Took jobs from anyone who'd pay. Never asked if they deserved what I'd helped deliver. I just found them and handed them over, sometimes to law, sometimes to other things." He paused. "I told myself I was doing good, catching bad men. But I was just hired muscle with a supernatural edge." "What changed?" "The job that killed the village." Caleb turned to face her, and his expression was haunted. "A cattle baron hired me to find 3 men who'd stolen from him. Said they were dangerous, said they'd killed his ranch hands and burned his property. So I tracked them to a settlement in the Utah territory, small place, maybe 30 families. I found the men in a boarding house, and I went in to take them. He stopped, jaw working. Clara didn't push, she just waited. They fought back. Used some kind of explosive. Black powder. Maybe? I never found out. It went off in the room and I panicked. Lost control. The marks surged and I channeled everything I had into stopping them, but it was too much. Way too much. The force erupted outward, and it didn't stop at the boarding house. It took out half the settlement. Buildings collapsed. Fires started. People died in their beds. His voice went hollow. 23 dead. 6 of them children. Clara's chest ached. Caleb, I found out later the cattle baron had lied. The 3 men he wanted weren't thieves. They were homesteaders who'd refused to sell their land. He hired me to kill them, and I did, along with 20 other innocent people. Caleb's hands clenched into fists, so I left, took what gold I had, came here, and swore I'd never use the marks again. Never let anyone close enough to give me a reason to lose control. Until now, Clara said quietly. Until now. He looked at her. You shouldn't have stayed, Clara. Tonight proved that. When the storm hit, I could have, but you didn't. Only because you were there. What happens next time when you're not? Clara crossed the room and stopped in front of him. Then we make sure I am there. Or we find another way to manage it. But you're not doing this alone anymore, Caleb. We're married. That means we face things together. You don't know what you're asking for. Neither do you. Clara reached up and gently pulled the glove off his right hand. Caleb went very still, but he didn't stop her. She placed his bare palm against her cheek. Does this hurt? No. Does it make the marks worse? No, he swallowed hard. It calms them. Then maybe that's the answer. Clara held his gaze. Maybe you've been so focused on control through isolation that you never learned control through connection. Caleb stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. His thumb moved slightly against her cheekbone, tentative, wondering. I don't understand you. You don't have to. You just have to trust that I'm not going anywhere. For a long moment they stood like that, his marked hand warm against her face, her hand steady on his wrist. Then Caleb pulled back gently and turned away, but not before Clara saw something shift in his expression. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. I'll make breakfast, he said roughly. I'll help. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and Clara noticed the way Caleb moved differently now, still careful but less rigid, less like a man walking on glass. He even left the gloves off while he worked, and Clara watched the silver marks on his hands catch the firelight as he sliced bread. They ate together at the small table, and for the first time since Clara had arrived, Caleb asked her a question. Why did you really come here? Clara looked up from her plate. I told you I needed... No. Caleb's gaze was steady. You needed protection and a roof, yes, but you could have found that anywhere. Why answer my notice specifically? Clara set down her fork. She'd known this question was coming eventually. Because it was honest. Honest? Most men who advertise for wives make promises. Romance, partnership, a better life. You didn't. You offered work and protection and no questions asked. She met his eyes. That told me you weren't looking for someone to fix you or save you. You were looking for someone to survive alongside, and that I could do. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What were you surviving? Does it matter? You asked me to trust you. I'm asking the same. Fair enough. Clara took a breath. My parents died when I was 12, fever. I went to live with my aunt in Philadelphia, my mother's sister. She took me in, but she never let me forget it was charity. I worked in her dress shop from dawn to midnight, 7 days a week, for 15 years. No wages, just room and board. She said I owed her that much for raising me. That's not raising, Caleb said quietly. That's indentured servitude. I know, but I had nowhere else to go and no way to leave. Until she died last year and the shop went to her daughter, my cousin, who made it very clear she didn't want me there. Clara's mouth twisted. So I left, took what little I'd managed to save and came west. I tried to find work in St. Louis, but no one wants to hire a woman my age with no references and no family. I was 3 weeks from destitute when I saw your notice. So you married a stranger. I married someone who needed what I could offer and offered what I needed. That seemed more honest than marrying for love that might not last, or security that might be a lie. Clara looked at him steadily. I don't regret it. Caleb studied her face. Even after last night? Especially after last night. Why? Because you let me see the truth. All of it. And you still kept me safe. Clara reached across the table and rested her hand over his. The silver marks warmed under her palm. That matters more than anything else. Caleb turned his hand over, fingers curling around hers. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. Connection. Caring about someone. He looked almost helpless. I've spent 5 years keeping everyone at a distance. I don't know how to let anyone in. We'll figure it out, Clara said. Together. They sat like that, hands linked across the table, until the sun rose fully and light flooded the kitchen. And for the first time since she'd arrived at North Ranch, Clara felt like she'd come home. The peace lasted 3 days. On the third afternoon, Clara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard hoofbeats. She straightened, shading her eyes, and saw 3 riders coming up the road from town. They weren't moving like neighbors paying a social call. They were moving with purpose. Caleb appeared from the barn, his posture instantly tense. He watched the riders approach, then turned to Clara. Go inside. Who are they? Law, or worse. He didn't take his eyes off the approaching men. Go inside, Clara. Lock the door. Caleb, please. Clara went, but she stood at the window, watching through the gap in the boards. The 3 men pulled up in front of the house. The leader was older, maybe 50, with a silver badge on his vest and a rifle across his saddle. The other 2 were younger, harder, wearing guns low on their hips like men who knew how to use them. The older man dismounted. Caleb Rourke? Caleb stood on the porch, hands loose at his sides. Yes. I'm Marshal Dixon. These are my deputies. We need to talk about an incident in the Utah Territory, 5 years back. Settlement called Broken Creek. Clara's blood went cold. Caleb didn't move. What about it? 23 people died there. Witnesses said a man matching your description was seen leaving the area just after. A man with strange marks on his skin. Dixon's voice was flat, professional. We have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of murder. The silence that followed was terrible. Clara pressed her hand to the window, heart pounding. Caleb's voice, when it came, was calm. I didn't murder anyone. So you admit you were there? I admit nothing without legal counsel. You can get counsel in Salt Lake City, after you're in custody. Dixon gestured to his deputies. Boys, take him. The 2 younger men moved forward. Caleb didn't run. He stood perfectly still, and Clara saw his hands curl slowly into fists. The air around him seemed to thicken, and she knew the marks were reacting, building pressure, preparing to surge. Caleb, she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her. Don't. One of the deputies reached for Caleb's arm. The moment his hand made contact, Caleb's whole body went rigid. Clara saw the silver marks flare visible through his shirt, saw the deputy stumble back with a yelp. What the hell? He's armed, the other deputy shouted, drawing his gun. I'm not armed, Caleb said, but his voice had that inhuman edge again. The marks were glowing brighter now, and the air crackled with static. Don't touch me. Any of you. Just don't. Marshal Dixon drew his own pistol. Rourke, you're under arrest. You can come peaceful, or we can do this hard. Your choice. Clara didn't think. She threw open the door and ran onto the porch, putting herself between Caleb and the guns. Stop. Ma'am, get out of the way. He didn't do it. Clara's voice rang out clear and desperate. He didn't murder those people. It was an accident. He lost control of something he didn't understand and people died, but it wasn't murder. He spent 5 years trying to atone. Clara, don't. Caleb's hand closed on her shoulder, and she felt the heat of the marks through the fabric. This is my fight. Like hell it is. Clara looked at the marshal. You want to arrest someone? Arrest the cattle baron who lied and sent him there. Arrest the system that made it possible. But don't take him for something he's been punishing himself for every day since it happened. Dixon's expression didn't change. Ma'am, I understand you're his wife, but the law doesn't care about remorse. It cares about justice for the dead. Then let him face trial here. where people know him, where they can see he's not a danger. That's not my call to make. Behind Clara, Caleb's breathing had gone ragged. She could feel the marks pulsing against her back, feel the terrible pressure building. He was losing control again, and this time there was no Storm to blame, just fear and rage and 5 years of guilt rising to the surface. "Caleb," she said quietly, reaching back to find his hand. "Breathe, like we practiced. There are too many people. If I lose it here, you won't. I'm here." Clara laced her fingers through his, feeling the marks flare hot against her skin. "We do this together, remember?" The deputies were shouting now, guns raised. Marshal Dixon was barking orders. The whole scene was seconds from catastrophe. And then Clara felt it. The moment Caleb made his choice, his hand tightened on hers, his breathing slowed, and the wild pressure in the air condensed into something focused, controlled. The guns flew from the deputies' hands, not violently. They simply lifted smoothly into the air and drifted to the ground 20 feet away, landing in the dirt like they'd been gently set down. The men stared, stunned into silence. Caleb's voice was steady now. "I'm not resisting arrest, Marshal. I'll come with you. But I'm not a murderer and I'm not dangerous, not unless you make me be. So you can cuff me and we can ride to Salt Lake City peacefully, or we can do this the hard way and I promise you'll regret it." Dixon looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Peaceful it is. Boys, get the restraints." Clara turned to face Caleb. His eyes were still edged with silver, but they were clear, focused. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." He cupped her face with both hands, and Clara saw the silver marks glowing faint beneath his skin. "This is the only way it ends. I face what I did. Accept the consequences." "What about me?" "You'll be fine. The ranch is in your name too. You'll have everything you need." He tried to smile and almost managed it. "You're good at surviving. I don't want to survive without you." Something broke in his expression. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I'm sorry, Clara, for all of this. You deserved better." "I got exactly what I chose." Clara gripped his coat. "And I'm not giving up on you. You hear me? I'm going to find a way to fix this." "There's nothing to fix. I killed 23 people." "By accident, while trying to stop criminals. That's manslaughter at worst, and even that's arguable." Clara pulled back to look him in the eye. "I'll find a lawyer. I'll get testimony. I'll do whatever it takes." Caleb stared at her like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Then one of the deputies approached with iron cuffs, and the moment shattered. They bound his wrists in front of him, carefully, after seeing what he could do. Caleb submitted without resistance, his face going blank and distant again. The marshal helped him onto a horse, and Clara stood on the porch watching as they prepared to ride out. At the last moment, Caleb looked back. "Clara, I'll be waiting," she said. He nodded once, then the marshal spurred his horse, and they were gone, dust rising in their wake. Clara stood alone in the yard, watching until they disappeared. Then she went inside, sat at the table where they'd shared breakfast 3 days ago, and let herself cry, once hard, for exactly 5 minutes. Then she dried her eyes, squared her shoulders, and started making plans. Because she'd meant what she said. She wasn't giving up. The lawyer's office in Fort Worth smelled like old paper and tobacco smoke. Clara sat across from a thin man with wire spectacles who listened to her story with the careful neutrality of someone who'd heard worse and believed less. "Mrs. Rourke," he said when she finished, "I appreciate your loyalty to your husband, but what you're describing is, forgive me, difficult to prove and harder to defend." "Why?" Clara kept her hands folded in her lap, projecting a calm she didn't feel. "He didn't intend to kill anyone. The explosion was accidental. That's manslaughter at most, not murder. Assuming we can prove it was accidental. Assuming we can explain how one man caused an explosion that leveled half a settlement." The lawyer, his name was Thornton, leaned back in his chair. "You mentioned unusual abilities, marks on his skin. Mrs. Rourke, a jury won't accept supernatural claims as a defense. They'll think he's insane or you are." "Then what do you suggest? Honestly? Hope for a plea agreement. If your husband cooperates, admits guilt, shows remorse, the prosecution might reduce the charges. He'd still face prison time, but not hanging. Claire's throat tightened. How much time? 10 years, maybe 15. The number hit her like a physical blow. 15 years. Caleb would be nearly 50 by the time he got out, and she'd be, what, 42? 43? A lifetime lost. There has to be another way, she said. Thornton spread his hands. If you find witnesses who can testify to his character or evidence that contradicts the prosecution's version of events, bring it to me. Otherwise, my advice stands. Take the plea. Clara left the office with her stomach in knots and her mind racing. She had no witnesses. Caleb had lived like a ghost for 5 years. No evidence. The settlement was 3 states away and 5 years gone. Nothing except her word that he was a good man trying to atone for a terrible mistake. It wasn't enough. She was halfway to the livery when she heard boots on the boardwalk behind her. "Mrs. Rourke, a moment." Clara turned. Sheriff Dawson stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his expression carefully neutral. He was a solid man in his 50s, weathered and cautious, the kind of lawman who survived by knowing when to look the other way. "Sheriff, heard you're trying to build a defense for your husband." "I am." Dawson glanced up and down the street, then gestured to the alley beside the general store. "Walk with me." Clara followed, wary. In the shadows between buildings, Dawson pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "This came through 2 days ago. Telegraph from Salt Lake City. Thought you should see it before the marshal does." Clara unfolded the paper. The message was brief and bureaucratic. Caleb Rourke, also known as the Marked Hunter, wanted in connection with Broken Creek Massacre. Additional charges pending. Suspect considered armed and extremely dangerous. Her hands shook. Additional charges? "There's more." Dawson's voice dropped. "I did some digging, asked around. Your husband's name came up in 3 other cases over the past 6 years. All violent, all unsolved. The law thinks he's not just responsible for Broken Creek. They think he's a hired killer who's been operating across the territories for years." Clara's vision tunneled. "That's not true. He told me. He tracked people, yes, but he handed them to the law. He wasn't an assassin." "Maybe not, but someone wants him painted that way." Dawson took the telegram back. "And if the prosecution stacks those cases on top of Broken Creek, your husband won't see daylight again. They'll hang him." The word hung in the air like smoke. Clara forced herself to breathe. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been sheriff in Fort Worth for 12 years, and in that time I've learned to read people. Your husband's a strange man, I'll grant you. But in 5 years he never caused trouble, never hurt anyone, never gave me reason to think he was dangerous." Dawson's jaw worked. "And I've seen the way he looks at you. That's not a killer, Mrs. Rourke. That's a man who found something worth protecting." Clara's eyes burned. "Can you testify to that?" "In a territorial court 3 states away. My word won't carry much weight." He hesitated. "But there might be someone whose word would." "Who?" "The doctor who saw his marks. Brennan. He's old, he's stubborn, and he doesn't like being told what to think. If you can convince him to testify that your husband's condition is medical, not criminal, it might plant doubt." It wasn't much, but it was something. Clara found doctor. Brennan in his office above the apothecary, bent over a ledger with a magnifying glass. He looked up when she knocked, and his expression soured immediately. "Mrs. Rourke, I wondered when you'd show up. May I come in?" "Depends. You here to threaten me into silence like the last fellow?" Clara blinked. "What last fellow?" Brennan set down his glass. 2 years back, man came through town asking questions about Caleb Rourke. Big fellow, spoke with an accent I couldn't place. Said he represented interested parties who'd prefer I keep quiet about what I saw when I treated your husband. Offered me money first. When I refused, he made it clear refusal wasn't healthy." "What did you tell him?" "That I'm too old and too ornery to be scared by thugs." Brennan's mouth twisted. "But I haven't spoken about it since, if that's what you're asking. Not until the marshal came around last week." Clara sat down uninvited. "Doctor, I need your help. My husband is facing murder charges, and the prosecution is going to paint him as a monster. But you saw his marks. You know there's something medical, something explainable about his condition. Explainable? Brennan laughed, but it wasn't kind. Mrs. Rourke, I've been practicing medicine for 30 years. I've seen burns, scars, tattoos, skin conditions of every variety. What I saw on your husband's back wasn't any of those things. Those marks were under the dermal layer, glowing like they had their own light source, and when I touched them, they were warm. Not fever warm, warm like touching a stove. But not supernatural. I didn't say that. Brennan leaned forward. I said explainable, and I don't have an explanation. No medical text I've read describes anything like it. So if you're asking me to stand up in court and lie, I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to tell the truth. Clara met his eyes. That you examined him, that you found unusual marks, that in your professional opinion, those marks weren't evidence of evil or criminality, but of a condition you didn't understand. That's all. Brennan studied her for a long moment. You love him. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. Yes. Even knowing what he's done? He made a terrible mistake. He's been trying to atone ever since. That's more than most men would do. Clara's voice steadied. And I've seen him fight for control when everything in him wanted to let go. That takes strength, Doctor, not weakness. Brennan was quiet. Then he sighed and pulled a fresh sheet of paper from his desk. I'll write a statement. Medical observations only. What I saw, what I measured, what I couldn't explain. I won't speculate, and I won't promise it'll help. But it's the truth. Relief flooded through Clara. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Truth doesn't always win in court. Brennan dipped his pen in ink. But it's a start. Clara left with the doctor's statement folded carefully in her reticule and rode back to North Ranch as the sun set. The house felt enormous and empty without Caleb. She'd grown used to his presence, the sound of his boots on the porch, the quiet way he moved through rooms, the careful distance he maintained that had slowly started to close. Now the distance was measured in miles and iron bars, and Clara didn't know how to bridge it. She lit the lamps and sat at the table, spreading out what little she had. Thornton's lukewarm offer to negotiate a plea, Sheriff Dawson's warning about additional charges, Dr. Brennan's medical statement. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Clara pressed her palms to her eyes and tried to think. There had to be something she was missing. Some angle, some leverage, A knock at the door made her jump. She rose carefully, heart hammering. It was full dark now, and visitors after sunset were rare. Who's there? A friend. The voice was female, low and unfamiliar. I've come a long way to speak with you, Mrs. Rourke. Please. Clara hesitated, then unbarred the door and opened it a crack. A woman stood on the porch, elderly, perhaps 70, with long silver hair braided over one shoulder and dark eyes that seemed to see straight through Clara. She wore traveling clothes and carried a worn pack, and when she moved, her sleeve rode up. Clara saw faint silver lines running across her wrist. Clara's breath caught. Who are you? My name is Ayanna. I'm of the Sky Clan. The woman's gaze was steady. And I'm here because your husband is in grave danger. Clara opened the door fully. Come in. Ayanna stepped inside and set her pack by the door with the ease of someone used to long journeys. Up close, Clara could see the marks more clearly, delicate silver patterns that wound up her arms and disappeared beneath her collar, just like Caleb's. But these didn't glow. They were settled, dormant, like scars that had long since healed. You have the same marks, Clara said. Yes, as does my granddaughter, though hers are still new. Ayanna moved to the fireplace and warmed her hands. The Sky Clan has carried these marks for 7 generations. We are born with the gift, the ability to sense and channel elemental forces. Earth, storm, water, fire. It is part of us, like breath. Clara's mind raced. Caleb said he was marked against his will, that it was done to him. It was. Ayanna's expression darkened. 5 years ago, 3 men stole sacred knowledge from our people. They learned the ritual, or part of it, and used it to mark others by force. They believed it would give them power, make them invincible. They were wrong. What happened to them? 2 died when the ritual went badly. The third disappeared. Ayana turned to face Clara. But they left damage behind. Men like your husband, marked without consent, without training, without the spiritual preparation needed to carry such power safely. Most went mad. Some died. Your husband survived because he's strong, but he's been living with a curse that was never meant to be his. Clara sank into a chair. Can it be removed? No. Once the marks settle, they're permanent, but they can be trained, controlled, transformed from burden to gift. Ayana's eyes were kind. That's why I'm here. I've been searching for survivors of the false marking for 3 years. When I heard about the arrest in Salt Lake City, a man with silver marks who lost control in a settlement, I knew it had to be one of ours. He's not one of yours. Clara stopped. He's afraid. He thinks he's dangerous. He is dangerous. But so is fire, and we still use it to cook and keep warm. Ayana sat across from Clara. Your husband needs to understand that the marks aren't a curse, they're a responsibility. And with proper training, he can carry that responsibility without fear. He's in a jail cell 300 miles away. How is he supposed to train? That's why I need your help. Ayana leaned forward. The men who marked your husband, they didn't just hurt him, they used him. I've tracked their movements, pieced together their operation. They were selling their services as enhancement, promising power to anyone willing to pay. And when things went wrong, they blamed their victims. Clara's pulse quickened. The Broken Creek Massacre. Was that them? I believe so. The settlement was near a site of spiritual significance, a place where elemental forces run strong. If the false-marked men lost control there, if they triggered a surge they couldn't contain, Ayana's voice went grim. It would explain the devastation, and it would mean your husband wasn't responsible. He was caught in the middle of something he didn't cause. Can you prove that? Not alone, but if I can find the third man, the one who survived, and if he can be made to testify, they'll never believe him over the prosecution's case. They will if he confesses to his crimes, if he admits he and his partners were responsible for Broken Creek, that they used your husband as a scapegoat. Ayana's eyes gleamed. And I know where he is. Clara's heart hammered. Where? Santa Fe, operating under a new name, selling the same lies. Ayana stood. I can find him, confront him, but I'll need time and your husband doesn't have much. The trial is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks? Clara's mind spun. What do you need from me? Delay the trial if you can. File motions, request extensions, anything to buy time. And tell your husband, Ayana paused, tell him he's not alone, that his people are coming. His people. Sky Clan. We take care of our own, even those marked by accident. Ayana shouldered her pack. I'll send word when I have news. Until then, have faith, Mrs. Rourke. Your husband is stronger than he knows, and so are you. She left as quietly as she'd come, disappearing into the night like smoke. Clara stood in the empty house, mind reeling, and felt something she hadn't felt since Caleb was taken. Hope. The next morning, Clara rode to Fort Worth and sent 3 telegrams, one to Thornton, instructing him to file for a continuance, one to the territorial courthouse in Salt Lake City, requesting visitor privileges for the accused's wife, and one to Ayana, care of general delivery in Santa Fe, with a single word, Godspeed. Then she went home and started packing. The journey to Salt Lake City took 8 days by stage. Clara traveled with a carpet bag and Caleb's coat, the one he'd worn the night of the storm, still smelling faintly of leather and rain. She slept in way stations and dusty hotels, surrounded by strangers, and thought about the first time she'd made this kind of journey. Desperate, alone, answering an ad from a man she'd never met. Now she was making it again, still desperate, still mostly alone. But this time she wasn't running toward survival. She was running toward something worth fighting for. Salt Lake City rose from the valley like a promise. Broad streets, sturdy buildings, mountains standing sentinel to the east. Clara found a boarding house near the courthouse and presented herself at the jail the next morning, Thornton's letter of introduction in hand. The guard was skeptical. Visiting hours are limited, ma'am, and your husband's considered high risk. I'm aware. I'd still like to see him. The guard sighed and led her through a series of locked doors to a narrow room divided by iron bars. On the other side sat Caleb. He looked thinner, tired. The high collar and gloves were gone. They'd taken those when they processed him, and Clara could see the silver marks clearly now, running up his arms and neck in intricate patterns. They were dim, almost dormant, but still visible. When Caleb saw her, his expression cracked. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "Visiting my husband." She sat on the wooden bench and gripped the bars. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." Liar. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "I'm managing." "Have they mistreated you?" "No, they're careful with me. Afraid, mostly." He looked at his hands, bare, exposed, the marks stark against his skin. "Word got around about what I can do. Now they keep me isolated. 3 guards minimum whenever they move me. Iron restraints." Clara's chest ached. "I'm working on getting you out." "Clara, don't." She leaned closer. "Don't tell me to give up. Don't tell me it's hopeless. I've found help, Caleb, real help." She told him about Ayanna, about the Sky Clan, the false marking, the 3rd man in Santa Fe. Caleb listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from disbelief to something fragile and uncertain. "You're saying I'm not the only one," he said when she finished. "You're not. There are others like you, born with the marks, trained from childhood. And Ayanna believes you can learn control. Real control, not just survival. Even if that's true, it doesn't change what happened at Broken Creek. It changes everything. If the men who marked you caused the surge, if you were caught in the backlash of their failed ritual, then you're a victim, not a perpetrator." Clara reached through the bars and took his hand. The marks were warm beneath her fingers. "We can prove this, Caleb. We can win. And if we can't, then we lose together." Clara held his gaze. "I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not ever. You understand?" Caleb stared at her, and Clara saw a dozen emotions flicker across his face. Hope and fear and gratitude and something deeper, something she was afraid to name. "I don't deserve you," he said hoarsely. "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." Clara squeezed his hand. "Now tell me everything you remember about the day of the massacre. Every detail, no matter how small. We're going to build a defense, and we're going to shred the prosecution's case piece by piece." They talked for 2 hours. Caleb described the job, the cattle baron's request, the 3 men he'd tracked, the boarding house in Broken Creek. He told her about the explosion, the panic, the moment when the marks surged out of his control and unleashed devastation he couldn't stop. And he told her about the aftermath, waking in the ruins, seeing the bodies, knowing he'd caused it, even if he hadn't meant to. By the time the guard came to end visiting hours, Clara had pages of notes and a clearer picture of what had happened. It wasn't exoneration, not yet, but it was enough to start building doubt. "I'll be back tomorrow," Clara said as they led Caleb away. He looked back at her. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Clara's throat tightened. "Never." She returned to the boarding house and spent the night transcribing everything Caleb had told her, cross-referencing it with the doctor's statement and the lawyer's notes. Patterns emerged. Inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline. Questions about the explosion's origin. Pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit the narrative of a cold-blooded killer. A telegram arrived the next afternoon. Short, unsigned, but Clara knew who it was from. Subject located. Proceeding with contact. Will advise. Ayanna had found him. Clara visited Caleb every day for the next week. They talked about the case, about the ranch, about nothing in particular, and slowly, carefully, the distance that had defined their marriage began to dissolve. Caleb told her about his childhood, growing up in a border town, losing his parents young, drifting until the marks gave him purpose. Clara told him about Philadelphia, about the aunt who'd stolen 15 years of her life, about the decision to come west and start over. "I didn't think I'd ever care about anyone again," Caleb said on the 5th day. "Didn't think I could afford to, and then you showed up and—" He shook his head. "You changed everything, Clara." "I didn't do anything." "You stayed. When anyone else would have run, you stayed." His voice was rough with emotion. "That's not nothing. Clara reached through the bars and touched his face. The marks on his throat warmed under her palm. I stayed because you're worth staying for. Caleb closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. For a moment they stayed like that, connected across iron and distance, and Clara felt the truth settle in her chest. She loved this man, this strange, wounded, careful man who'd tried so hard to protect everyone by destroying himself. She loved him, and she was going to save him. The second telegram came on the 8th day. Confession secured, documentation en route, prepare for arrival. Clara's hands shook as she showed it to Thornton. The lawyer's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Mrs. Rourke, if this is legitimate, it is. Then we might actually have a case. He looked at her with something approaching respect. How did you manage this? I had help. Clara folded the telegram carefully. When can we present this to the court? As soon as the documentation arrives and I can verify its authenticity. But Mrs. Rourke, Thornton's expression turned serious. Even with a confession, your husband isn't completely exonerated. He still used his abilities recklessly. He still caused deaths, even if unintentionally. The court may show leniency, but there will be consequences. I understand. Clara met his eyes. But there's a difference between 15 years in prison and a pardon. We're fighting for the latter. That's ambitious. I married an ambitious man. Thornton almost smiled. Then let's get to work. Ayanna arrived 3 days later with a young woman at her side. The girl couldn't have been more than 20, with dark hair and golden skin and silver marks running down her arms like rivers. She looked at Clara with cautious curiosity. This is my granddaughter, Sani, Ayanna said. She's come to help. They met in Thornton's office. Ayanna spread documents across the desk, signed confessions, witness statements, maps showing the location of the false marking sites. The story they told was damning. 3 men who'd stolen sacred knowledge and used it for profit, marking dozens of victims across the territories, then vanishing when things went wrong. The third man, a con artist named Garrett Webb, had spent 5 years in hiding, but Ayanna had tracked him down and extracted a full confession. He admitted to Broken Creek? Thornton asked. He did. Said he and his partners were attempting a mass marking ritual, thought they could create an army of enhanced men to sell to the highest bidder. But the ritual failed catastrophically. The surge killed his partners and devastated the settlement. Ayanna's voice was hard. Your client was there tracking 3 of Webb's previous victims. He got caught in the backlash and panicked. His marks reacted defensively, but he didn't cause the initial surge. Webb's botched ritual did. Thornton read through the confession twice. This changes everything. If I can get Webb to testify, he will. I've made arrangements. Ayanna's smile was sharp. He's very motivated to cooperate. Clara didn't ask what kind of motivation Ayanna had provided. She didn't want to know. The trial was reset for 2 weeks later. In that time, Thornton worked around the clock building their defense. Dr. Brennan's medical statement. Webb's confession. Testimony from Ayanna about the Sky Clan and the true nature of the marks. Character witnesses from Fort Worth, including, surprisingly, Sheriff Dawson. Clara visited Caleb every day and watched hope bloom cautiously in his eyes. This might actually work, he said on the night before the trial. It will work. Clara spoke with more confidence than she felt. You're going to walk out of here a free man, Caleb looked at her through the bars. And then what? Then we go home, to North Ranch, together. Just like that? Just like that, Clara smiled. Unless you're planning to back out of our agreement. Never. Caleb reached through and caught her hand. I love you, Clara. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you. Clara's vision blurred. I love you too. They held hands until the guard came to separate them, and Clara left the jail with her heart full and her resolve absolute. Tomorrow, they would fight. And tomorrow, they would win. The courtroom was smaller than Clara expected. Wooden benches worn smooth by decades of anxious waiting, tall windows letting in cold morning light, and a judge's bench that seemed to loom over everything like a headstone. Clara sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking, and watched them bring Caleb in. He wore the same clothes he'd been arrested in: dark pants, a plain shirt, no coat. The iron cuffs were back on his wrists, and 2 guards flanked him as he walked to the defendant's table. But his head was up, his shoulders straight, and when his eyes found Clara's across the room, something passed between them. Strength, promise, love. Thornton leaned over. "Remember, Mrs. Rourke, no outbursts, no matter what the prosecution says. We present our case calmly and let the evidence speak." Clara nodded. She'd been rehearsing this moment in her mind for weeks. But now that it was here, her pulse hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. The judge entered, a severe man in his 60s named Holloway, with steel gray hair and eyes that revealed nothing. The bailiff called the court to order, and the prosecutor stood. His name was Mitchell, and he was everything Clara had feared. Sharp-voiced, confident, building his case like a stone wall. He painted Caleb as a mercenary who'd used unnatural abilities to kill for profit, a man who'd left a trail of violence across 3 territories, culminating in the massacre at Broken Creek. 23 innocent lives snuffed out by a single man's reckless wielding of power he should never have possessed. "The evidence will show," Mitchell said, pacing in front of the jury, "that Caleb Rourke is not a victim. He's a predator who used fear and violence to enforce his will. And when he lost control, or perhaps when he simply stopped caring, he slaughtered men, women, and children without mercy or remorse." Clara's fingernails dug into her palms. Beside her, Ayanna sat perfectly still, but Sonny shifted restlessly, her marked hands clenched tight. Mitchell called his first witness, a land surveyor who'd been in Broken Creek the week before the massacre. The man testified that he'd seen a stranger matching Caleb's description, asking questions about 3 men staying at the boarding house. "Aggressive questions," he said. "Threatening." Thornton stood to cross-examine. "Did my client threaten you personally?" "No, but did he threaten anyone in your presence?" "Not exactly, but the way he spoke." "So your testimony is based on a feeling, not on any actual threatening behavior." The surveyor hesitated. "I suppose." "Thank you. No further questions." The morning dragged on. Mitchell paraded witness after witness. People who'd seen Caleb in the days before the massacre. People who'd heard the explosion. People who'd helped dig bodies from the rubble. Each one added another layer to the prosecution's narrative. Dangerous outsider brings death to peaceful settlement. By the lunch recess, Clara's hope was fraying at the edges. Thornton tried to reassure her in the hallway. "This is standard. He's building an emotional case. But when we present our evidence, the facts will outweigh the fear." "Will they?" Clara looked through the window at Caleb being led back to his cell. "That jury looks ready to convict him right now." "Then we change their minds this afternoon." Thornton's voice was firm. "Trust the process, Mrs. Rourke." Clara wanted to believe him, but trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The afternoon session began with Thornton calling Dr. Brennan to the stand. The old physician looked uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, but his voice was steady as he described examining Caleb 3 years prior. "I observed unusual markings beneath the skin," Brennan said, silver in color, appearing to have some kind of luminescence. "When I inquired about their origin, Mr. Rourke became distressed and refused further examination. In your medical opinion, were these markings evidence of criminal activity?" "No, they were evidence of a condition I'd never encountered, something physiological that I couldn't explain with conventional medical knowledge." Mitchell stood. "But you just testified you couldn't explain it. So how can you be certain it wasn't evidence of something criminal? Dark practices, perhaps?" Brennan's eyes narrowed. "Because I'm a doctor, not a superstitious fool. Unexplained doesn't mean evil." A few people in the gallery murmured. Judge Holloway rapped his gavel once. "Order." Thornton called Ayanna next. She took the stand with quiet dignity, and when she rolled up her sleeves to show her own marks, the courtroom went silent. "These marks," she said, "have been carried by my people for 7 generations. We call ourselves Sky Clan, and we are born with the ability to sense and channel elemental forces. It's not magic or witchcraft. It's a gift passed through bloodlines, requiring years of training to master safely." "And Caleb Rourke?" Thornton asked. "Does he carry the same gift?" "No. He carries a curse." Ayanna's voice hardened. 5 years ago, 3 men stole our sacred knowledge and used it to forcibly mark others. They promised power, but what they delivered was agony and madness. Mr. Rourke survived the false marking, but he's been living with abilities he never asked for and was never trained to control. Mitchell rose. Objection. The witness is providing hearsay about alleged events with no corroborating evidence. Your Honor, Thornton said quickly, the defense has secured testimony from one of the men responsible. We request the court's permission to call him as a witness. Holloway's eyebrows rose. You have one of these alleged criminals in custody? We do. Garrett Webb, currently being held by federal marshals pending transfer. The judge considered. I'll allow it. But Mr. Thornton, this testimony had better be relevant. It will be, Your Honor. They brought Webb in under heavy guard. He was a wiry man in his 40s with thinning hair and the hunted look of someone who'd spent years running. When he took the stand, his eyes darted around the courtroom like he was searching for an exit. Thornton approached carefully. Mr. Webb, please state your occupation for the court. I don't have one. Not anymore. What was your occupation 5 years ago? Webb's jaw worked. I sold enhancements, promised people I could make them stronger, faster, more capable. How did you deliver on those promises? We used a ritual, stolen from the Sky Clan. Webb's voice dropped. My partners and I, we'd mark people, force the symbols into their skin using heat and pressure and other things. Told them it would give them power. And did it? Sometimes. Mostly it drove them mad or killed them. Webb looked at his hands. We didn't care. We got paid either way. The courtroom erupted. Judge Holloway hammered his gavel. Order! I will have order! Thornton waited for the noise to subside. Mr. Webb, do you recognize the defendant? Webb looked at Caleb for the first time. Something flickered in his expression. Guilt, recognition, fear. Yeah, I know him. How? We marked him. June of 1870. He was unconscious when we did it. Someone had knocked him out and brought him to us, said they wanted him enhanced for a tracking job. We performed the ritual, took our payment, and left. Clara's hands flew to her mouth. Caleb had been unconscious. He hadn't even known what they were doing until it was too late. And Broken Creek? Thornton pressed. What happened there? Webb swallowed hard. We were trying something new. A mass marking, 20 people at once. Thought if we could do it successfully, we'd make a fortune. But the ritual failed. The power surged out of control, and his voice cracked. It killed my partners instantly, and then it spread, tore through the settlement like a wildfire. Buildings collapsed, people burned, the earth itself split open. I barely escaped. Was Caleb Rourke responsible for that surge? No, he was there, but he didn't cause it. We did. Webb looked at the jury. He got caught in the backlash. His marks reacted defensively, probably trying to protect him, but the real devastation came from our failed ritual. He's not a killer, he's a victim. The silence that followed was absolute. Clara watched the jury's faces, shock, doubt, the slow dawning of understanding. Mitchell shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is clearly a coached testimony designed to... Objection noted, Holloway said curtly. Mr. Webb, are you testifying under duress? No, sir. Has anyone promised you leniency in exchange for this testimony? No, sir, I'm doing this because... Webb paused. Because I'm tired of running, and because that man doesn't deserve to hang for what we did. Mitchell spent an hour trying to break Webb's testimony on cross-examination. He attacked his credibility, his criminal history, his motives. But Webb held firm, repeating the same story with consistent detail. By the time court adjourned for the day, Clara could see doubt spreading through the jury box like cracks in ice. That night, she visited Caleb. He looked drained, overwhelmed, like he couldn't quite process what had happened. They believed him, Caleb said. I saw it in their faces. They actually believed him. Because he was telling the truth. Clara reached through the bars. You didn't cause the massacre, Caleb. You were caught in someone else's catastrophe. But I still killed people when my marks surged in self-defense, in panic. That's not murder. That's not... Clara gripped his hand. Tomorrow, Thornton's going to argue for dismissal of all charges, and I think he's going to win. Caleb looked at her with something between hope and disbelief. What if he doesn't? Then we appeal. And we keep fighting until we win. Claire's voice was steady. But I don't think it's going to come to that. She was right. The next morning, Thornton presented his closing argument with calm precision. He walked the jury through the evidence. Dr. Brennan's medical testimony, Ayanna's explanation of the marks, Webb's confession. He painted a picture not of a criminal, but of a man who'd been violated, who'd struggled to survive an ordeal he never asked for, who'd spent 5 years trying to protect others from the damage done to him. Caleb Rourke is not the villain in this story, Thornton said. He's the victim. And punishing him for crimes committed by others would be a miscarriage of justice this court cannot allow. Mitchell's rebuttal was aggressive but hollow. He had no answer for Webb's confession, no explanation for the medical evidence, no way to refute the clear timeline of events. By the time he sat down, even he looked defeated. Judge Holloway called a recess to review the evidence. Clara sat in the hallway with Ayanna and Sonny, barely breathing, while Thornton paced and Caleb waited in the holding cell below. 2 hours later, they were called back into the courtroom. Holloway looked at the jury. Have you reached a verdict? The foreman stood, a middle-aged rancher with weathered hands and careful eyes. We have, Your Honor. On all charges of murder, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Clara couldn't hear anything over the rushing in her ears, couldn't see anything except Caleb's face as he turned to look at her. Not guilty. The words echoed in her mind like a bell. Holloway banged his gavel. Order, there's more. The noise subsided. Holloway looked at Caleb. Mr. Rourke, while the jury has acquitted you of murder, the evidence shows you did use your abilities in a manner that resulted in loss of life, albeit unintentionally. Normally, I would impose a sentence for manslaughter. However, given the extraordinary circumstances of your case, the forced marking, the lack of training, the evidence that you've spent 5 years in self-imposed isolation to prevent further harm, I'm inclined toward leniency. He paused, and Clara's heart hammered. Therefore, I'm sentencing you to time served plus 5 years of supervised probation. You'll report monthly to a federal marshal, and you'll be prohibited from using your abilities except in cases of clear self-defense. Violation of these terms will result in immediate imprisonment. Do you understand? Caleb's voice was rough. Yes, Your Honor. Then you're free to go. Holloway rapped his gavel one final time. Court dismissed. Clara didn't remember standing, didn't remember pushing through the crowd. She only knew that suddenly she was at the railing and Caleb was there, on the other side, and the guards were removing his cuffs. The moment his hands were free, he reached for her. Clara grabbed them, marks and all, and held on tight. It's over, she whispered. It's over, Caleb repeated, and his voice broke on the words. They stood there, hands locked across the railing, while the courtroom emptied around them. Thornton was shaking hands with someone. Ayanna was speaking quietly to Sonny, and people were filing out into the cold afternoon. But Clara and Caleb stayed exactly where they were, anchored to each other. Finally, a guard cleared his throat. Folks, you're going to have to move along. Caleb looked at Clara. Can we go home? Yes. Clara smiled through tears. Let's go home. They collected Caleb's belongings, his coat, his gloves, the few personal items he'd had when arrested. He put the gloves on out of habit, then paused and pulled them off again, tucking them into his pocket. Don't need those anymore, he said quietly. Clara took his bare hand, silver marks warm against her palm, and led him out into the sunlight. The journey back to North Ranch took 9 days. They traveled by stage and horseback, stopping at way stations and small towns, moving through the landscape like two people waking from a long dream. Caleb was quiet most of the time, processing everything that had happened, but he never let go of Clara's hand for long. On the 6th night, they camped under stars so bright they looked like silver dust scattered across black velvet. Clara sat beside the fire, wrapped in Caleb's coat, while he checked the horses. When he came back, he sat down beside her and stared into the flames. I keep thinking it's not real, that I'm going to wake up in that cell, and the trial will still be ahead of me. It's real. Clara leaned against his shoulder. You're free, Caleb. Because of you. If you hadn't fought for me, you would have done the same for me. I don't know if I would have had the courage. Clara turned to look at him. You've been fighting for 5 years, alone, with no help, trying to protect everyone from something you didn't even cause. That takes more courage than anything I did. Caleb met her eyes, and in the firelight Clara could see the silver marks on his throat, faint and steady. I love you, he said. I know I said it before, but I need to say it again. I love you, Clara, more than I thought I was capable of. I love you too. Clara reached up and traced one of the marks with her fingertip. And I'm not afraid of these anymore. I'm not afraid of any part of you. Caleb caught her hand and pressed it to his chest. Beneath her palm, she could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady and alive. When we get home, he said, I want to do this properly. Start over. Be the husband you deserve. You already are. I want to be better. His voice was fierce. I want to give you everything you gave me. Safety, home, partnership, all of it. Clara smiled. You already gave me that, Caleb, the day you married me. They kissed then, slow and careful, like they were learning each other for the first time. The fire crackled, the horses stamped and blew, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. But Clara and Caleb stayed wrapped in each other, finally allowing themselves to believe in a future they'd both thought was impossible. When they finally reached North Ranch 3 days later, the house looked exactly as Clara had left it. Weathered stone and timber, the boarded windows still unrepaired, the yard swept clean. But it felt different now. Not like a place of hiding, but like a home they'd fought to keep. Caleb stood in the yard, looking at the house with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. I never thought I'd see this place again. But you did. Clara took his hand. We both did. They went inside together. The interior was dusty but intact. Clara had left everything in order before she'd gone to Salt Lake City. The fire needed building, the pantry needed stocking, the roof probably needed patching. But none of that mattered. Caleb turned to Clara, and the distance that had defined their marriage from the beginning was finally, completely gone. He pulled her close, one hand cupping her face, the other settling at her waist. Thank you, he said, for everything, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Always, Clara whispered. They stood there holding each other in the quiet house, and Clara felt something settle in her chest, not just relief or joy, though she felt both of those. Something deeper, the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with. That night, they shared the bed for the first time. No distance, no barriers, just skin against skin and silver marks that glowed soft in the darkness. Caleb was careful at first, tentative, still half convinced he might hurt her. But Clara showed him with touch and whisper that he wouldn't, that he couldn't, that she was stronger than he'd given her credit for. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Caleb traced idle patterns on Clara's shoulder. I want to tell you something. What? The night of the storm, when you held on to me and helped me through it. He paused. That was the first time in 5 years I felt human. Not dangerous, not cursed, just human. Clara's throat tightened. You were always human, Caleb. I didn't feel like it. Not until you. He kissed her temple. You gave me back something I thought was gone forever. What's that? Hope. Clara turned to face him, and in the moonlight filtering through the window, she could see the silver marks covering his arms and chest, beautiful and strange and entirely his. Then we'll build on that. Together. Caleb pulled her closer. Together. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and for the first time in 5 years, Caleb Rourke slept through the night without nightmares. Morning came with birdsong and pale light. Clara woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window looking out at the land. He'd put on his pants, but nothing else, and the marks on his back were clearly visible, intricate silver patterns that seemed to shimmer in the early sun. Clara rose and joined him. What are you thinking about? What happens now? Caleb glanced at her. The probation means I can't use the marks except in self-defense, which is fine. I don't want to use them. But Ayana said I need training, that without it, I'll always be at risk of losing control. Then we'll find a way to train you. Clara leaned against his side. Ayana's still in the territory. We can ask her to help. She's already done so much. And she said Sky Clan takes care of their own, even those marked by accident. Clara looked up at him. You're not alone in this anymore, Caleb. You have me. You have Ayana and Sani. You have a whole community you didn't know existed. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I spent 5 years believing I was a monster, that I didn't deserve connection or happiness or... He stopped. I was wrong. Yes, you were. He almost smiled. You're not going to let me wallow in guilt, are you? Not for a second. Clara took his hand. You've carried that guilt long enough. Now it's time to put it down and live. Caleb looked at their joined hands, her small fingers interlaced with his larger ones, her pale skin against the silver marks running across his knuckles. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I, Clara smiled. But we'll figure it out, like we figured out everything else. There was a sound outside, hoofbeats approaching. Caleb tensed, instinct taking over, but Clara squeezed his hand. It's all right. I'm not expecting anyone, but we're not in danger. They went to the door together. 2 riders were coming up the path. Ayana and Sani, both looking travel-worn but determined. Ayana dismounted with practiced ease. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Rourke. I hope we're not intruding. Not at all, Clara said. Please, come in. They gathered around the kitchen table, and Ayana accepted coffee with quiet gratitude. We came to check on you and to make an offer. Caleb looked wary. What kind of offer? Training. Ayana gestured to Sani. My granddaughter has been learning to master her marks since childhood. She's skilled enough now to teach others. With your permission, we'd like to stay here for a few months and help you develop proper control. Caleb's expression shifted. Surprise, hope, uncertainty. I don't want to impose to... You're not imposing. This is what we do. Ayana's voice was gentle. Too many of the false marked have died or gone mad because they had no guidance. You survived. You deserve the chance to thrive. Clara looked at Caleb. It's your choice. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Yes, I'd like that. Sani smiled, the first real smile Clara had seen from the young woman. Good. We'll start tomorrow, but today you rest. You've earned it. They spent the rest of the morning making arrangements. Ayana and Sani would stay in the barn. It was spacious enough and they were used to rough accommodations. In exchange for training, they'd help with ranch work. A fair trade, Ayana insisted. By noon, it was settled. Clara stood on the porch watching Sani lead the horses to the corral, while Ayana and Caleb talked quietly near the barn. The sight made something warm bloom in her chest. After months of isolation, after weeks of terror and uncertainty, after everything they'd been through, they were building something here, something real and lasting. That evening, the 4 of them shared a meal around the table. It was simple food, beans and bread, coffee strong enough to strip paint, but it felt like a celebration. Ayana told stories about the Sky Clan's history. Sani demonstrated how she could make small objects levitate using focused intention, and Caleb listened with the hungry attention of someone finally learning who he really was. Clara watched him across the table. This man she'd married sight unseen, this stranger who'd become her partner and her love, and felt a fierce gratitude. They'd fought for this, fought through fear and judgment and the weight of impossible odds. And they'd won. Later, when Ayana and Sani had retired to the barn and the house was quiet, Caleb pulled Clara into his arms. I never thought I'd have this, he said against her hair. A home, a family, a future. You have all of it now. Because of you. Because of us. Clara pulled back to look at him. We did this together, Caleb. Don't forget that. He kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise. And when they finally broke apart, Clara saw something in his eyes that had been missing before. Not just hope or love or gratitude, but peace. The marks on his skin glowed soft in the lamplight, and for the first time since she'd met him, Clara saw them not as a curse, but as a part of the man she loved. Beautiful and strange and absolutely his. They stood there, wrapped in each other, while outside the wind moved through the cottonwoods and the stars wheeled overhead. Tomorrow would bring training and challenges and the slow work of building a life. But tonight, there was only this. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, choosing each other again and again, and finally allowing themselves to believe in forever. Training began at dawn the next day. Clara woke to find Caleb already gone from bed, the sheets still warm where he'd been. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find him in the yard with Sonny, both of them standing perfectly still with their eyes closed. The morning air was cool and still, and in the soft light Clara could see the silver marks on both their arms glowing faint and rhythmic, like breathing. Ayanna stood to the side, watching. When Clara approached, the older woman gestured for silence. "They're learning to sense the flow," she whispered. "Earth, air, the pull of water underground. Before Caleb can control the marks, he needs to understand what they're connected to." Clara watched in fascination as Caleb's breathing synchronized with Sonny's. The marks pulsed brighter, then dimmed, then brightened again. After several minutes, Sonny opened her eyes and nodded. Caleb opened his a moment later, looking exhausted but focused. "Good," Sonny said. "Sonny Fasan. You're not fighting it anymore. That's progress." "It still feels wrong," Caleb said. "Like I'm opening a door I should keep locked." "Because you've spent 5 years teaching yourself to resist. Now you need to unlearn that." Sonny rolled her shoulders. "Again. This time, when you feel the pull, follow it. Don't force, don't push. Just let it move through you." They practiced for 2 hours. Clara brought coffee and watched from the porch, marveling at the change in Caleb. He was still cautious, still careful, but there was a new quality to his movements. Purpose. Like he was finally allowing himself to believe he could master this instead of just survive it. When they broke for breakfast, Caleb's shirt was soaked with sweat, and the marks on his arms were glowing steady and bright. He sat at the table and drank water like a man who'd crossed a desert. "How does it feel?" Clara asked. "Strange. Good strange." He flexed his fingers, watching the silver pattern shift across his knuckles. "For the first time, it doesn't hurt. It's just there, part of me." Ayanna ladled eggs onto plates. "That's because you're working with your nature instead of against it. The marks aren't a curse, Caleb. They're a gift that was given badly, but the gift itself is neutral. What matters is how you choose to use it." "I don't want to use it at all," Caleb said quietly. "I just want to live without being afraid I'll hurt someone." "Then that's what we'll work toward. Control without fear, strength without violence." Ayanna set a plate in front of him. "It'll take time, but you have time now. Thanks to your wife." Caleb looked at Clara, and the gratitude in his eyes made her chest ache. She reached across the table and took his hand, marks and all. "We both have time, and we're going to use it well." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for training, Sonny teaching Caleb to channel small amounts of force, to sense weather patterns before they arrived, to ground the energy when it threatened to surge. Afternoons were for ranch work, mending fences, tending horses, preparing for winter. Evenings were for the four of them gathered around the table, sharing stories and meals and the slow building of trust. Clara watched Caleb transform. The careful distance he'd maintained for so long gradually dissolved. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, touched her freely, a hand on her shoulder, fingers tangled with hers, his arm around her waist. The gloves stayed in a drawer, forgotten. But there were hard days, too. Days when the training went wrong and Caleb's control slipped, sending a burst of force that cracked a fence post or shattered a water bucket. Days when the weight of what he had done at Broken Creek settled over him like a shroud, and he couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Days when Clara found him standing alone in the dark, staring at his marked hands like they belonged to someone else. On those days, Clara didn't try to fix it. She just stayed close, sat with him in silence, reminded him with her presence that he wasn't alone anymore. 6 weeks into the training, Marshal Dixon rode up to North Ranch unannounced. Clara saw him coming and her stomach dropped, but Caleb was calm when he walked out to meet him. "Marshal," Caleb said evenly, "this is my monthly report visit." Dixon dismounted, eyeing Caleb carefully. "How are you managing the probation terms?" "Well, I report to Sheriff Dawson in Fort Worth every week. I haven't used the marks except in training, which is supervised. Caleb gestured toward where Sonny was working near the barn. Ayanna and her granddaughter are helping me develop proper control. Dixon's gaze sharpened. That the Sky Clan elder from the trial? Yes, sir. Huh. Dixon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll be honest, Rourke. When I arrested you, I thought you were guilty as sin. But after hearing the evidence and watching you conduct yourself with dignity through the whole ordeal, I'm glad you got acquitted. Caleb's surprise was visible. Thank you, Marshal. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. She's the one who moved heaven and earth to prove your innocence. Dixon tipped his hat to Clara. Ma'am. Clara nodded, throat tight. Dixon remounted, made a few notes in a leather-bound book, and rode off without further comment. When he was gone, Caleb turned to Clara. He believed in me. A lot of people believe in you now, Clara said. You just have to start believing in yourself. That night, Caleb held Clara close and whispered against her hair, I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying. I know, Clara said, and you're succeeding. 2 months after the trial, Clara woke feeling sick. Not violently ill, just queasy and off balance in a way that sent a shock of recognition through her. She lay in bed, counting back weeks in her mind, and felt her heart begin to pound. She waited 3 more days to be certain. Then she told Caleb. They were in the barn, and Caleb was practicing with Sonny, learning to lift objects using focused intention rather than brute force. Clara watched from the doorway, waiting for a break in the lesson. When Sonny called for rest, Clara caught Caleb's eye. Can we talk? Privately? Concern flickered across his face, but he nodded and followed her outside. They walked toward the creek, out of earshot, before Clara stopped and turned to face him. I'm pregnant, she said. Caleb went perfectly still. For a long moment he just stared at her, and Clara couldn't read his expression. Then he said, very quietly, Are you certain? As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I'm certain. Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides. The marks flared bright, then dimmed as he forced control. Clara, I know what you're thinking, she said quickly, that the baby might inherit the marks, that it might be dangerous, but Caleb... I'm terrified, he said, and his voice cracked on the word. What if the child is born like me? What if I can't protect them? What if... Clara stepped forward and took his face in her hands. Then we'll handle it, together, like we've handled everything else. This is different. This is our child. Exactly, our child. Not a curse, not a mistake. Ours. Clara held his gaze. And whatever happens, whatever the baby inherits or doesn't inherit, we'll love them and raise them and teach them, just like Ayanna's teaching you. Caleb's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to be a father. Neither do I know how to be a mother. We'll learn. Clara smiled through her own tears. We're good at that, remember? Learning as we go. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight Clara could barely breathe. Against her hair, he whispered, I love you, and I'm scared out of my mind, but I love you. I love you too, Clara said, and we're going to be fine. When they told Ayanna and Sonny that evening, the older woman's face split into a wide smile. A baby! That's wonderful news. Is it? Caleb's voice was tight. What if the child carries the marks? Then the child will be Sky Clan by birth, Ayanna said firmly, and we'll be here to help you raise them properly. With training from infancy, they'll never know the fear and isolation you experienced. They'll grow up understanding their gift as natural and good. Sonny leaned forward. My mother was born marked. So was I. It's not a curse when you're taught correctly. It's just part of who we are. Caleb looked between them, something like hope dawning in his expression. You'd stay? Help us? As long as you need us, Ayanna said. Sky Clan takes care of family. And your family now. The months that followed were both ordinary and extraordinary. Clara's belly grew round while Caleb's control over the marks grew stronger. He learned to sense storms days in advance, to channel small bursts of energy for practical purposes like starting fires or moving heavy objects. He learned to ground himself when emotion threatened to spike, to breathe through the surge instead of fighting it, and he learned to hope. The baby was due in early spring. As winter settled over North Ranch, Clara and Caleb prepared. They converted a corner of the main room into a nursery, building a cradle from cottonwood that Caleb sanded smooth with his own hands. Clara sewed tiny clothes from flour sacks and old shirts, her stitches careful and even. Ayanna taught them both about childbirth, what to expect, how to manage. On the coldest night in January, Clara went into labor. It started as a dull ache in her back, then progressed to sharp pains that took her breath away. Caleb was beside her immediately, his face pale but his hands steady. Ayanna took charge with calm efficiency, sending Sani to boil water and Caleb to build up the fire. "You're doing beautifully," Ayanna murmured as Clara gripped the bed frame through another contraction. "Just breathe. Your body knows what to do." Labor lasted through the night and into the gray dawn. Caleb held Clara's hand the entire time, whispering encouragement, wiping sweat from her face, radiating a fierce protective love that made Clara feel invincible even when the pain was unbearable. Finally, as the sun broke over the horizon, the baby came. A boy, small and red-faced and screaming with impressive lungs. Ayanna cleaned him quickly and placed him in Clara's arms, and Clara looked down at her son with wonder so profound she couldn't speak. Caleb leaned over them both, his expression stunned. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Look at his arms," Ayanna said gently. Clara lifted the baby's tiny arm, and her breath caught. Faint silver lines traced across the infant's skin, delicate as spider silk, barely visible, but unmistakably there. The marks of SkyClan. Caleb made a choked sound. No, I didn't want—" "Caleb!" Ayanna's voice was firm. "Look at him! Really look!" Caleb forced himself to focus. The baby had stopped crying and was staring up at his father with unfocused dark eyes. The silver marks pulsed gently in rhythm with his breathing. Not wild, not dangerous. Just there, as natural as the color of his skin or the shape of his ears. "He's beautiful," Clara said, "and he's ours, marks and all." Caleb reached out with a shaking hand and touched his son's cheek. The moment his marked finger made contact with the baby's marked skin, both sets of symbols flared bright, then settled into a soft, harmonious glow. "They're resonating," Sani breathed, "father and son." "Connected." Caleb's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Clara, then at his son, then back at Clara. "What do we name him?" Clara had thought about this for months. "Samuel, after my father." "Samuel Rourke." Caleb tested the name, then smiled through his tears. "It's perfect." Ayanna stepped back, giving them space. "I'll make tea. You three rest." Clara settled back against the pillows, exhausted and elated, with Samuel cradled against her chest and Caleb's arm around them both. The baby made soft snuffling sounds, already seeking to nurse, and Clara helped him latch with Ayanna's patient guidance. As Samuel nursed, Caleb watched with an expression of such tender awe that Clara's heart could barely contain it. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A family, a son, something worth more than survival." "You have it now," Clara said, "and you're going to be an amazing father." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're already protecting him, loving him, worrying about his future." Clara looked up at her husband. "That's what good fathers do." Caleb pressed a kiss to her temple, then to Samuel's downy head. The silver marks on all three of them glowed soft in the morning light, connected by something deeper than blood. The weeks after Samuel's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. But they managed. Caleb proved surprisingly adept at soothing the baby. His marked hands seemed to calm Samuel when he fussed, the resonance between their symbols creating a connection Clara could only marvel at. Ayanna and Sani stayed through the winter, teaching Caleb and Clara how to care for a marked child, how to watch for early signs of ability, how to create a safe environment where Samuel could explore his gifts without fear, how to raise him with the knowledge that his marks were a blessing, not a curse. "You're doing everything right," Ayanna said one evening as they watched Caleb walk the floor with a fussy Samuel. "That boy will grow up secure and loved. He'll never know the fear his father carried." Clara hoped she was right. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived it was glorious. The land turned green overnight, wildflowers blooming in impossible colors across the prairie. Samuel grew strong and healthy, his silver marks becoming more defined as he got older. And Caleb? Caleb flourished. The careful, haunted man Clara had married was still there, but he was layered now with confidence and joy. He laughed easily, played with his son, worked the ranch with quiet competence. The marks no longer glowed with barely suppressed violence. They pulsed steady and calm, integrated into who he was instead of warring against it. One warm afternoon in May, Clara sat on the porch watching Caleb teach Samuel to sense the wind. The baby was only a few months old, but he tracked his father's movements with intense focus, his tiny marked hands waving in the air. Sonny sat beside Clara, her own marked arms bare in the sun. "You saved him, you know." Clara looked at her. "Who?" "Caleb. When we first heard about him, a false-marked survivor living in isolation, we assumed he'd be like the others. Broken. Dangerous. Beyond help." Sonny's expression was warm. "But you'd already started healing him, giving him a reason to hope. By the time we arrived, he was ready to learn because you'd taught him he was worth saving." Clara's throat tightened. "He saved himself. I just stayed. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone willing to stay when everyone else runs." Sonny smiled. "You're stronger than you think, Clara Rourke." That evening, after Samuel was asleep, and Ayanna and Sonny had retired to the barn, Clara and Caleb sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I got a letter today," Caleb said. "From Marshal Dixon." Clara tensed. "What did it say?" "He's recommending early termination of my probation, says I've demonstrated exceptional compliance and rehabilitation." Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. "If approved, I'd be fully free. No more monthly reports, no more restrictions." "Caleb, that's wonderful." "Is it?" He looked at his hands, marked, powerful, capable of both creation and destruction. "Part of me wants it, but part of me thinks the probation is fitting, a reminder of what I did, what I'm capable of." Clara took his hands in hers. "You don't need a legal sentence to remember. You'll carry Broken Creek with you always, I know that, but you don't have to carry it as punishment anymore. You can carry it as motivation, to be better, to use your gifts wisely, to teach Samuel to do the same." Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When did you get so wise?" "I married you, didn't I?" Clara smiled. "That took some wisdom." He laughed, a real laugh, full and unguarded. Then he pulled her close and kissed her as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared. The probation was officially terminated 6 weeks later. Caleb received the notice by mail and stared at it for a long time before showing Clara. "You're free," she said softly. "I've been free since the trial. This is just—" He paused, searching for words. "Permission to believe it." They celebrated quietly that night. Ayanna made a special meal, Sonny played a wooden flute she'd carved herself, and they toasted with coffee since Clara was still nursing. Samuel gurgled and waved his marked hands, seeming to understand that something important was happening. Later, after everyone else had gone to bed, Caleb stood at the window looking out at the land. Clara joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I want to do more. Build something bigger than just survival." He turned to face her. "There are others out there like me. False-marked survivors who are scared and alone and don't know help exists. I want to find them. Bring them here. Create a place where they can heal and learn and belong," Clara finished. "Yes, exactly." Caleb's eyes were bright. "We have the land. We have Ayanna's knowledge. We have proof that recovery is possible. What if we use that to help others?" Clara's mind raced, seeing the possibilities. A sanctuary for the marked and the marginalized. "Would you?" Caleb hesitated. "Would you want that? It would change everything. No more quiet ranch life. We'd have strangers coming and going, people in crisis, constant work." Clara thought about the years in Philadelphia, feeling invisible and worthless. About the desperate journey west to marry a stranger. About everything she and Caleb had overcome together. "I think I've been preparing for this my whole life." Caleb's expression transformed. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing. We're really doing this? We're really doing this. The transformation of North Ranch began immediately. They added 2 bunkhouses for visitors, expanded the barn, cleared land for gardens and training grounds. Ayanna sent word through SkyClan networks about the sanctuary, and slowly, carefully, people began to arrive. A young woman who'd been marked by the same false ritualists and had spent 3 years hiding in mining camps. A teenage boy whose marks had appeared spontaneously and who'd been called demon-touched by his own family. An older man who'd carried the marks for decades in secret, never knowing others like him existed. Each one came broken in some way. And each one, slowly, began to heal. Clara discovered she had a gift for this work. Her years of surviving her aunt's cruelty had taught her how to see past defenses, how to offer help without pity, how to create safety without control. She organized the sanctuary's daily operations, managed supplies, mediated conflicts, and became the steady center that allowed everything else to function. Caleb trained the new arrivals, teaching them what Sani had taught him: control without fear, strength without violence, the understanding that the marks were a responsibility, not a curse. Samuel grew up surrounded by people who wore silver symbols just like his. For him, the marks were utterly normal. He never learned to fear them or hide them. By his 2nd birthday, he could sense weather changes and make small objects levitate, skills he used primarily to steal cookies from high shelves and make his parents laugh. 2 years after the sanctuary opened, Sheriff Dawson rode out with unexpected news. A circuit judge was coming through Fort Worth, and he wanted to meet Caleb. Clara's stomach clenched. Why? Dawson looked uncomfortable. To acknowledge what you've built here, ma'am. Word spread about North Ranch, about how you're helping people who've got nowhere else to go. The judge wants to recognize that officially. The meeting took place in Fort Worth's courthouse, the same building where Clara and Caleb had married 5 years earlier. Judge Holloway presided, older but still sharp-eyed. Mr. Rourke, Holloway said, I've received reports about your sanctuary. Remarkable work you're doing. Thank you, Your Honor, but it's not just me. I'm aware. Your wife, the SkyClan elders, the community you've built, all remarkable. Holloway leaned forward. I'm here to offer formal territorial recognition of North Ranch as a protected sanctuary, which means legal protection for your residents, funding assistance, and official sanction for your work. Caleb's surprise was evident. Why would you do that? Because what you're doing is important. You're taking people society has rejected and giving them purpose, teaching them to use their gifts constructively. That's rehabilitation, Mr. Rourke. Real rehabilitation, not just punishment. Holloway's expression softened. And because 5 years ago I sentenced you to probation hoping you'd prove me right about second chances. You have. Abundantly. The recognition changed everything. With official sanction came resources, funds for construction, legal protection for residents, connections to other communities doing similar work. North Ranch grew from a small sanctuary to a thriving settlement, but it never lost its heart. Clara made sure of that. 5 years after Samuel's birth, Clara was pregnant again. This time with twins, a boy and a girl, both born marked, both healthy and strong. They named them Michael and Elena, and Samuel was a doting older brother from the first moment. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family. New buildings rose to house the steady stream of people seeking refuge. Gardens flourished, providing food for dozens. Training grounds echoed with the controlled release of elemental force as residents learned to master their gifts. And through it all, Caleb and Clara worked side by side, partners in every sense, building not just a sanctuary, but a legacy. One autumn evening, 10 years after Clara had first arrived at North Ranch, she stood on the porch watching the sun set over land transformed. Children played in the yard, marked and unmarked, learning together that difference wasn't something to fear. Adults worked the gardens, tended animals, practiced their abilities under Sani's patient instruction. Smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the smell of dinner cooking in a dozen different kitchens. Caleb joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Silver threaded his dark hair now, and fine lines creased the corners of his eyes. But the marks on his skin glowed steady and peaceful, fully integrated into who he'd become. "Remember when this was just you and me?" he said quietly. "And you sleeping in the barn because you were afraid to get too close," Clara added. Caleb laughed. I was an idiot. You were scared. There's a difference. Clara leaned into him. Look what we built from that fear. We built from your courage, Caleb corrected. You're the one who refused to give up. On me, on us, on all of this. We did it together, Clara said. Like everything else. Samuel ran past, chasing Michael, both boys' marks glowing as they used small bursts of force to leap higher than should be possible. Elena sat on Ayana's lap, learning to sense the patterns of wind. Other children, residents' kids, some marked, some not, played alongside them without distinction. This is what I wanted, Caleb said. A place where being marked doesn't mean being alone. Where children grow up knowing their gifts are valued, not feared. You gave that to them, Clara said, and to yourself. Caleb turned her to face him. Even after 10 years, his eyes still held that intensity that had startled her on their first meeting, but now it was tempered with peace. I couldn't have done any of it without you. You know that, right? I know we did it together. That's all that matters. He kissed her then, slow and sweet, while around them the sanctuary hummed with life they'd created. When they broke apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked. Answering my notice? Marrying a stranger who turned out to be... Everything I needed, Clara interrupted. No, Caleb, I've never regretted it. Not for a single moment. Even when I was arrested? When it looked like I'd hang? Especially then. Because that's when I learned what we were capable of when we fought together. Clara touched the marks on his throat. Still warm, still alive, but no longer frightening. You gave me purpose, Caleb. A family. A home worth defending. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Caleb's eyes were bright. I love you, Clara Rourke, more than I can ever properly express. I love you too, now and always. They stood there as twilight deepened, watching their children play and their community thrive. The wind carried the sound of laughter and conversation, the smell of sage and wood smoke, the promise of another peaceful night. North Ranch had become exactly what they'd dreamed. Not just a sanctuary for the marked, but a home for anyone who'd ever felt broken or unwanted or impossible to love. A place where second chances were real and redemption was possible. Where a man once called the marked hunter could become a teacher, a father, a beacon of hope. And where a desperate young woman from Philadelphia who'd married a stranger for survival could become the heart of a community, the mother of marked children, the partner of a man who'd learned to transform his curse into purpose. Years continued to pass. Samuel grew into a confident young man with perfect control over his gifts, eventually taking over much of the training program. Michael and Elena developed their own unique relationship with the marks. Michael favoring earth-based abilities, Elena drawn to storm sensing like her father. More children were born, both to Clara and Caleb, and to other sanctuary residents. The community expanded, built new structures, sent teachers out to help other emerging sanctuaries across the territories. But through it all, North Ranch remained the original, the place where it all began. The ranch that had once housed a reclusive man hiding from his past and the brave woman who'd refused to let him hide anymore. On their 20th anniversary, Clara and Caleb stood in the same spot where they'd been married, the Fort Worth courthouse. But this time they weren't there for a hasty legal arrangement. They were there to renew their vows, surrounded by family and friends, and a community that had grown far beyond anything either of them could have imagined. Caleb wore no gloves. The marks on his hands and throat were visible to everyone, and no one looked away in fear. Clara wore a dress Sonny had made, embroidered with silver thread that echoed the patterns on her husband's skin. 20 years ago, Caleb said, his voice steady and clear, I married you because I was desperate for someone who wouldn't ask questions, someone who would accept the bargain and keep their distance. The gathered crowd laughed softly. Clara smiled, remembering. I had no idea, Caleb continued, that you would become my salvation, that you would fight for me when I'd given up on myself, that you would love me not despite the marks, but with them. You saw me, truly saw me, and you stayed. His voice roughened with emotion. Everything good in my life came from that choice you made. Our children, our home, our purpose, all of it traces back to the moment you decided I was worth saving. Clara's eyes burned. My turn. Please. She took his marked hands in hers. 20 years ago, I came here running from a life that had taught me I was worthless. I answered your notice because I needed protection and a roof, and I expected nothing more. But you gave me everything. She looked around at their children, at Ayanna and Sani, at the dozens of sanctuary residents who'd become family. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to believe that broken people can heal and cursed things can be transformed. You taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Caleb's grip tightened on her hands. The marks glowed bright, responding to the emotion running through him. I choose you, Clara said. Today and every day. Now and always. Now and always, Caleb echoed. They kissed to thunderous applause, and when they broke apart, Clara saw Samuel holding his siblings, all three of them marked and proud and absolutely certain of their place in the world. She saw residents weeping with joy, saw Ayanna smiling with deep satisfaction, saw the future spreading out before them like a blessing. That night, back at North Ranch, they lay together in the bed they'd shared for 20 years. The house was quiet, the children asleep, the settlement peaceful under a blanket of stars. Do you ever think about those first days, Caleb asked, when I wouldn't even take off my gloves? Sometimes it feels like a different life. It was. I was a different person. He traced patterns on her shoulder. You made me into who I am now. We made each other, Clara corrected. That's how partnership works. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I used to think the marks were punishment, payment for every bad thing I'd done. But now I think they were a gift I wasn't ready for, and you taught me how to receive it properly. He kissed her temple. Thank you, Clara, for everything. Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me, for building this life with me. They fell asleep tangled together, just as they had on that first night after Caleb's release from jail. But now there was no fear, no uncertainty, no distance, just 20 years of choices stacked like stones into something solid and lasting. In the morning, Clara woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window like he had so many times before. But now he wasn't alone. Samuel stood beside him, and together they watched the sun rise over North Ranch, over the sanctuary they'd built, the community they'd gathered, the legacy they were creating. Clara joined them, slipping her hand into Caleb's. He pulled her close, and the three of them stood there, father, mother, son, watching light spread across the land they'd transformed from a place of hiding into a beacon of hope. It's beautiful, Samuel said quietly. It is, Caleb agreed, and it's ours. All of ours. Clara looked at her husband's profile. Older now, marked by time and silver symbols both, but infinitely more at peace than the haunted man she'd married. She thought about the journey they'd taken, the fear and courage, the trials and triumphs, the slow transformation of curse into blessing. She thought about the girl she'd been, desperate and alone on a stage platform in Fort Worth, reading a notice that promised nothing but work and protection. And she thought about the woman she'd become, mother, partner, sanctuary keeper. Someone who'd learned that the bravest thing you can do is stay when everyone else runs. That love isn't about fixing someone, it's about standing beside them while they fix themselves. I have no regrets, Clara said quietly. Caleb looked at her, silver marks glowing soft in the morning light. Neither do I. And as the sun climbed higher and North Ranch woke to another day of purpose and healing and hard-won peace, Clara Rourke knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice 20 years ago. She'd answered a notice from a stranger. She'd married a man marked by forces he didn't understand. She'd fought for him when the world wanted him condemned. And together, they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of what they'd been. Now and always, just as they'd promised. Together.